And hello and welcome to this WQA webinar. PFAS standards are changing. Here's what you need to know. We'll be looking at the impact on NSF ANSI 53 and 58 treatment technologies for WQA members and Gold Seal clients. I'm Wes Bleed, and we want to thank you for joining us. For WQA members and Gold Seal clients, a special thank you and welcome. If you're not a member or client, consider joining us by all means. Let me introduce our presenters for today's webinar. Zac Gleason is WQA's Laboratory Director. Caroline Kenney, WQA's Government Affairs Coordinator based in Washington. And Abigail Cain, WQA's Associate Director of Certification Operations. Just a few housekeeping measures as we go, and you have a question, please use the Q&A feature for entering your questions. We'll take those questions at the end. If for some reason your question isn't asked, we'll try to follow up as best we can. The webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive a link by email soon. And also, WQA certified professionals will earn a zero point 0.1 CPD credit for attending today's webinar. That's, by the way, live attendance only, and we'll award those automatically based on the attendees list. All right? And with that, let's get started. Let me toss it over to Abigail Cain for the presentation.
So actually, I will be starting the presentation.
I'm
Sorry about
sorry.
that, Wes. Hi,
Sorry.
everyone.
Sorry.
I'm Caroline Kenney. I am WQA's Government Affairs Coordinator. We're going to go over a little bit of some governmental background on how we got to this specific standard. I think it is helpful to get a little bit of background on where the federal and state governments are at in terms of PFAS standards. So, in April 2024, the Biden administration announced their EPA PFAS final rule. So they set the standards for the final MCL for PFOA and PFOS at 4 parts per trillion. They also set standards for PFHXS at 10 parts per trillion, PFNA at 10 parts per trillion, Gen X at 10 ppt, and then a mixture of multiple PFAS chemicals at the hazard index. They announced then that it required initial monitoring by April 26, 2027, and compliance and public notification deadlines for April 26, 2029. And then this is background to get into the next slide, which gets us to where we are today. So the 2026 federal PFAS overview. So things have shifted a little bit under the Trump administration. I want to make it clear, though, managing PFAS is still a priority under this administration. The EPA announced that they intend to maintain the national primary drinking water regulations for PFOA and PFOS at 4 parts per trillion. They plan to delay compliance deadline from 2029 to 2031. So for those two contaminants, the only thing that they want changed is the compliance deadline. They also announced their intent to rescind and reconsider regulations for PFHXS, PFNA, Gen X, and the hazardous index mixture. Ongoing litigation is impacting the rulemaking for PFXHS, PFNA, Gen X, and PFBS. So I think it's important to give a little bit more detail on some of this litigation that's happening. So in October 2024, water utility organizations filed for judicial review of the rule in DC Circuit Court. Industry groups are supporting the lawsuit, and environmental groups are defending EPA. We are seeing a potential scenario that we consider most likely, which is that the DC Circuit grants EPA's motion to partially vacate the rule and regulations for PFNA, PFHXS, Gen X, and Hazard Index. So we assume that those will be struck down and then reconsidered. PFOA and regulations remain enforceable. So I want to make it clear until we get final ruling, these standards are still set, with compliance deadlines likely extended to 2031. And they are also proceeding with rulemaking. So the piece on rulemaking, I think, is really important to talk about because that could end up being challenged in court due to anti-backsliding provisions within the Safe Drinking Water Act, and only Congress is able to change things at that point. We have been having conversations with EPA about their rulemaking process. They could not give us exact timing, but we can expect that to occur in the coming months. And then as we get to the state PFAS overview, it's important to note that many states are going to be following guidance from EPA rather than establishing their own MCLs. There were states that set their own regulations for PFAS before this April 2024 rulemaking came out. Because they're only able to match or lower their standards to below what EPA has set. So 18 states have adopted enforceable regulatory standards, 10 have issued non-enforceable advisory levels, and 2 maintain both regulatory and advisory levels. So basically, if these standards, especially those for other PFAS, if they're rolled back or modified in any way, states, we can see there being potential for them to step in and set standards. Again, PFAS is on everybody's mind. We track legislation and regulatory rulemaking at WQA in government affairs. I'm seeing PFAS legislation come down all the time. That includes some of these chemicals that EPA is reconsidering. So I like to say the toothpaste is not going back in the tube when it comes to PFAS, not just PFOA and PFOS, even though I do know that those are more common contaminants. There's still priorities for state legislatures, still priorities for state agencies. I would say some states are probably more likely to take quicker steps on the rescinded and reconsidered PFAS. If they're more regulatorily inclined. So not every state is going to try to step in where the EPA is taking a step back. But again, WQA Government Affairs is here to monitor. We work with a great group of federal consultants that keep us updated on the goings-on of EPA. So we want to make sure that you always stay updated. Check out our newsletter for updates on the rulemaking that's coming down the pipeline. But again, want to make it clear that we are totally on top of what is happening at the legislative and regulatory levels on PFAS. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Zac to go over our new NSF ANSI PFAS claims.
Thanks. And just as a reminder, at the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A button where you can click, you can add questions there anytime as we're going through this, and we'll address them at the end. So part of what precipitated this webinar was a approval of a ballot that came to the Joint Committee for updating the PFAS standards for performance testing, both in 58 and 53. So just quickly to review what changed, you can see here PFOA and PFOS both dropped to 4 ppt for the allowable effluent, and then we dropped PFHXS as well. That's primarily because of a couple of states that have that set at 18. It was at 20. And then PFNA, we set it at 6, PFHPA at 20, and then the total PFAS limit. So if you're going for a total PFAS reduction claim, the maximum effluent is now at 20, and that's an additive combination of all of the detections in the test. PFBS was dropped, so we're no longer going to be adding that in as a contaminant. And PFDA, there's not really a change here, but just for awareness, some people miss it. That's something that we're adding to the test water, but we're not actually testing on the effluent side. So why are we making these changes? Caroline just went through sort of the regulatory landscape, so I won't touch on that too much. But as a standards joint committee, we really try to align with standards in states and at the national level, but also we try to stay meaningful to the public. So taking a look at the toxicological evidence that the EPA has produced, we really want to make sure that the standards are meaningful and protective, and that we're making our decisions on science that is available. And so that's really what is driving this push to go ahead and lower the effluent levels now. And there are other changes coming. So next slide. This is the piece as manufacturers that I know a lot of people are pushing and waiting for. The influent levels, the challenge levels that we're putting into these tests is still very high. 1,500 combined for PFOA and PFOS is very high. We, as a task group that is working on this, are committed to making sure that that's reflective of what's happening, what people are seeing actually in their water quality around the United States and North America generally. And the best information that we can get on that is this UCMR5 monitoring, which is finished, but the data is not all in. And that's tracking 29 different PFAS as well as lithium, these emerging contaminants. I looked just this morning, it was at 89, a couple of weeks ago, and now we're at 95% of those results have come in. So hopeful that that will be in the next month or two. Once we have all of that data, we will gather and review it and do statistical analysis looking at it. We're also going to continue to watch what's happening on the regulatory side. Then we typically shoot for a 90th percentile. That means, 90% of households are at this level or below, and that's typically what drives our decision about what the influent challenge level is. There are sometimes outliers that we take into consideration, but generally that's what we target. And so looking at the data we have so far, there's a very, very strong set of evidence to suggest that these influent challenge levels should be lowered significantly, which will, of course, improve the performance of all of the products out there. So that's coming, but unfortunately, there's no hard date to when the data will be all completed. So we're kind of stuck waiting for that. We did not want to wait to lower the effluent because of that toxicological data that the EPA produced. There also is some discussion at the committee and task group level about hotspots. As you know, there's some contamination sites where the influent is higher, and so there's a potential that we may have an optional higher influent claim that goes into the standard for those types of situations. Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of cover generally how occurrence data influences standards. The UCMR5 is a really good example. We have also some research studies out of universities and other private research firms and well data that we consider when we look at this stuff. We create a task group of focused individuals, hopefully representative of industry regulators and testing laboratories. We review that and discuss and come to a consensus on what we're setting the levels at. Again, the goal is always to be protective and meaningful to the public, to be comparative to any national standards that are out there, but also achieve this kind of reasonable worst case. We're not looking for the absolute worst case that can possibly occur, but something that is going to cover the vast majority of situations that we see in North America. And then that is presented to the task group first as a ballot. Once everybody agrees at the task group level, that goes to the joint committee. If everybody agrees at that level, then it gets introduced to the standard. And the next slide, I talk a little bit about how long that typically takes. If you want to jump forward for me. Thank you. So again, this is an ongoing task group for several years that we've been focused on it, but the general process is if there's an issue in the standard that anybody has a problem with or thinks we should change the standard, they can put in an issue paper that's open to anybody, not just the joint committee members. That's reviewed and either voted on immediately or a task group is formed to address it. As I said, that eventually boils out to a ballot that comes to the whole committee. We vote on that. Any negative votes are adjudicated and reviewed, and updates as necessary are done. And then We go to publication. Typically, the standards are published once a year, and then there's an implementation period that follows that for when that actually impacts certifications. That's my guess, is that this piece of the puzzle, the PFAS puzzle, is kind of what's delayed the release of 53 and 58. We really want to get these in because they're important, but we'll see what happens with NSF's secretariat is the one that's managing the actual publication process. Thanks. I'm going to pass it over to Abby, who will cover more certification side of stuff.
Thanks, Zach. And I see a lot of really good questions in the Q&A right now, which I think I'll be able to answer in my portion of the presentation. So once a standard is published, certification bodies then need to address implementation of the standard. And implementation is mainly an internal review process that results in the certification body certifying to the newest version of the standard. So this process is initiated by each CB individually once the next version of the standard is released. From there, if applicable, we evaluate data to make an informed decision on the compliance period to set after implementation. In the case of the recent NSF ANSI 53 changes, there will be some type of compliance period once the standard is implemented. It is not expected that all existing certified products will meet the new criteria on day one of the new standard being implemented. Similar to how certification bodies set terms or criteria for a recertification or retesting cycle, they also will set the terms for a period of compliance once a standard is implemented when there are direct certification impacts. Once that compliance period is determined, it's typical that the certification body will reach out to notify their impacted certification clients so that they know their expectations in advance of the standard actually being implemented. From there, the standard is implemented, and again, there is then that set period of compliance to allow time to meet the new criteria. The timeline for the standard implementation and the period beyond is set directly by each certification body. However, it is considered best practice to implement in a timely manner and to be certifying to the newest version of each standard. And to add an additional clarification, any new products that are being certified will be evaluated to the newest version of the standard, assuming that that has been implemented by the certification body. So setting this timeline for a newly implemented standard is not completely straightforward. Certification bodies consider many different things when determining this timeline. Specifically for these changes, we will be reviewing the following. First and foremost, test data. We'll be looking at current data supporting certified products, which includes reviewing reporting limits, effluent results, and dates of completion. The certification body is really looking to understand how current test data will be impacted and to get an understanding of how many certified products will require retesting. Laboratories will also evaluate reporting limits as updates may be needed to meet the new criteria. A second consideration is treatment technology. So activated carbon filtration, reverse osmosis, and anion exchange water treatment technologies can be effective at reducing PFAS in a home's drinking water. The effectiveness of each technology depends on how much and the type of PFAS that's found in the water that one is attempting to treat. As the standard criteria becomes more stringent, it is likely that further time and investment on technology will be needed to achieve the new criteria. There are also options within the standard under NSF ANSI 53 Normative Annex 6, which covers treatment trains. Treatment trains are commonly combinations of carbon and reverse osmosis, which are certified under NSF ANSI 53. And as the standards change, we may see more utilization of treatment trains to achieve PFAS claims under the new criteria. We also consider precedents that may have been set by other standards. So for example, a recent implementation of the new version of NSF ANSI CAN 600 set a date for January 1st, 2028 for PFAS extraction requirements to align with the EPA ruling that Caroline mentioned earlier from 2024. So this may also be a consideration when determining the timeline for this NSF ANSI 53 implementation. We also try to have alignment among the certification bodies to support consistency in the industry. And finally, we also look at what potential future changes to standard criteria may be made. So potential near changes to the influent challenge concentration might influence our determination on a timeline. If the influence change, testing is going to be impacted once again. So looking at certification impacts, the first major impact is to the testing. There were previous limitations in testing related to analytical capability at low single-digit PPT levels. Data will now need to demonstrate compliance with the new 4 PPT maximum effluent criteria for PFOA and PFOS. We do anticipate that some point-of-use devices can be used to meet the new criteria with previous test data. However, if previous test data does not meet the new effluent criteria, or if previous test data shows reporting limits that exceed the new pass-fail criteria, then retesting will be required to comply with the latest version of NSF ANSI 53. Again, that retesting period will be determined by each certification body individually. As mentioned before, this will also require laboratories to reevaluate reporting limits if they are not already meeting this requirement. And it is also important to consider that there are different options for a PFAS claim, whether it's for an individual PFAS compound or a total PFAS claim, and testing will impact both types of claims. There is new pass-fail criteria for a few individual PFAS compounds, which also impacts the total PFAS claim because the total PFAS claim requires compliance with those individual compound limits and an aggregate total PFAS limit. Moving on to the second major impact to certification, which is related to product literature. Specific parts of the standard required literature will require updates due to changes in this newest version of NSF ANSI 53. Most notably, the performance data sheet, or PDS, will be impacted. The standard table, which is table 8.2, which is a requirement within the PDS, has been modified to match the new criteria and will need to be revised for any products that currently hold a PFAS claim. Information in that table includes the reduction substance, influent challenge concentration, and the maximum permissible product water concentration. Many manufacturers also include the average percent reduction in their PDS to highlight the performance of the product, which may also require updates if retesting is needed. Changes may also be needed to product packaging or within user manuals, although nothing specifically has been called out as part of the standard changes. And additionally, if retesting is required and products cannot meet the new criteria within the specified period of compliance by their certification body, the claims would need to be removed from the product literature. And finally, I think one of the most important things is just how to be proactive. And so I think number one is staying informed. WQA has many resources available which provide regulatory and standard updates. Additionally, if you have any specific questions, you can always contact us here at the Gold Seal program. If you want to test to the new standard criteria, you can reach out to your certification body or testing laboratory to determine current testing capabilities. And if you have currently certified products with a certified PFAS claim, you'll want to review your impacted products and previous data to determine if retesting will be required. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Zac to cover some things with our research foundation.
Yeah, just thank you. As a brief update, most of you are aware WQRF continues to pursue a surrogate for testing, and so that we can reduce the total number of compounds that we're looking for in this certification effort. And they've completed phase one back in 2024, identifying PFBA as a likely candidate because of how it performed and its correlation with both short-term and long chain, sorry, short chain and long chain PFAS compounds. And they've going to kick off phase two here in the spring, continuing to work with PFBA, but also still considering some other PFAS in that research. And WQRF is collaborating with NSF to make sure that this surrogate would be accepted. Keeping the Joint Committee informed of all the developments and providing the data to that committee so we're aware as we're going into the standards development process. And secondarily, they wanted to make sure that this group was aware that the study on retention of PFAS looked really good. So 98% retention of PFAS in simulated landfill, looking to make sure that products that have been loaded with PFAS are not leaching back into the environment. So that was very good news. And that report's going to be available in March. So just hang out here for a second if people want to read more of that, but that's kind of the overview. And thank you very much for attending. I think we're moving into Q&A now.
Fantastic, everybody. Thank you so much for the presentation thus far. And yes, time for some Q&A. So let's jump back over to Washington. And Caroline, can you say more about the litigation that could impact what the final federal rules look like for PFAS contaminants? And, more specifically, would the EPA be able to rescind the regulations for the contaminants unilaterally?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. So right now, I think it's important to say EPA is not able to amend regulations to make them less protective of health. So under the anti-backsliding provision of the Safe Drinking Water Act, the goal is to make sure that we are not going backwards in terms of protecting public health. The statute's ambiguous in nature, but it's largely expected to prevent the increase of MCLs or the rescission of contaminant regulations altogether, but could allow some changes around the edges. So their intent to rescind and reconsider regulations for contaminants that aren't PFOA and PFOS is likely to need to be directed by an act of Congress or a court case like the one that's happening in the circuit court, or else it will be subject to additional litigation pursuant to the anti-backsliding provision.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Over to Zac. Does WQA conduct R&D testing to the PFAS compounds?
Yes, absolutely. So when we run the standard, we would track the data regardless of what the effluents are, and always open to work with manufacturers who have specific test parameters that they want to use. We can lower the influence if you want to see what that would do to your capacity, and we will always report the effluents as measured. So happy to help with any R&D testing requests.
Great. And then back to Caroline for, again, just for a moment, will point of use and point of entry filtration devices be considered eligible technologies for Safe Drinking Water Act or SWA compliance for PFAS contaminants?
Yeah, so that is something that we are actively considering. So the current rule does not explicitly require or prohibit point of use and point of entry devices from serving as compliance technology. As a standard practice with Safe Drinking Water Act compliance, they have issued memoranda for small systems, indicating that it may be viable for very small systems. These are conversations that we are actively engaged on with the EPA. We know how important this technology is, especially for very small systems, and know the benefit that it would have to our members if we can make sure that their technologies can get into the right hands. Official guidance for the rules surrounding small systems will be where the EPA more directly addresses this variable. Again, that's something that we have been actively discussing with EPA. We want to make sure that the EPA is aware of, how much effort we put into the technology that our members are manufacturing and dealing. We want to make sure that we have programs that are viable. So federal guidance supports these technologies as an option for compliance. State compliance manuals and guidance will be more likely to carry similar recommendations. So we want at the federal level, basically for them to give us kind of almost a green light of making sure that states feel comfortable implementing and deploying point of use and point of entry technology.
Okay. And Abby, timing is always a big question when you look at all of these different questions. What is the typical time frame a certification body allows for implementing a standard change so that we can estimate how long we have to complete any required retesting?
Sure, that's a great question. The short answer is that it really depends on the specific contaminant that's changing and how it's changing. In the past, some of the standard changes have resulted in certification bodies putting kind of a set time frame on it. So, for example, manufacturers must be meeting the new criteria within 1 year of standard implementation. Other times, certification bodies have said, let's address the changes during your regular recertification or retesting cycle. The timeframe is flexible to ensure that all impacted manufacturers have plenty of time in advance, while also still ensuring that we are protecting consumers who purchase these products in the marketplace. But just a reminder, and I saw some questions about this, but the standard is not published yet. So we are ahead of the game in terms of bringing awareness to the new criteria.
Okay, very good. And back to Caroline. Is there federal funding available for communities to comply with the rule by investing in filtration technologies?
Yeah, so the bipartisan infrastructure law actually provided $9 billion in funding to remediate PFAS in drinking water. Roughly half of it went towards the state revolving fund model. Other half went towards grants for small and disadvantaged communities, including eligibility for addressing PFAS and emerging contaminants in private well water. So this funding is set to expire after fiscal year 26, which is the current federal fiscal year. We are continuing to have meetings like on the Hill about this funding. We're continuing to advocate for a continuation of these funds or creation of additional new funding authorities that can be used specifically for PFAS mitigation that can include point of use and point of entry devices as eligible costs. So that also includes our efforts on the Healthy H2O Act, which is to get grant funding into the hands of private well owners who need to deal with contamination in their wells, as well as a focus on EPA programs that could be created to benefit people. So this is in its early stages, but Congress is focused on solutions that can hopefully be implemented in the coming years, especially as the new rules enforcement date approaches, whether that ends up being 2029 or 2031.
All right, sorry about that brief delay in my mouse. Okay, some great questions coming into the Q&A here today, and this one I think is good for Zac. How is total PFAS being defined?
Yeah, so a total PFAS claim, we're adding all 8 of the compounds described in the standard to one mix that's going through the product, and we're collecting individual effluent levels for 7 of those, right? Because one of them we're not tracking. In order to achieve the claim, you have to have that total additive effluent of each of the compounds added together be less than 20 for the volume that you're claiming. So, if you had 1 PPT out of each, you have 7 PPT total, you're passing. If you had 10 of one and 20 of another and the rest were 0, you're ending up at around 31, and that's failing even though you passed for some of them. So that's kind of how that works.
Okay, and let me stay with you, Zac, on this whole issue of levels. The PFOA and PFAS effluent level is updated to 4 points per trillion. What was it before?
I think it was at 20. Currently, it's at 20. And I think it's currently combined. I would need to go back and look just with the effort here on the standards. They are now splitting them so that each PFOA and PFOS are considered individually, and each of them has to be at 4 PPT. Before they had kind of combined the influent on that ones. But yeah, I think it was 20 before.
Okay. And for Zach and Abby, um, whomever, and maybe both, if a hotspot challenge water scenario is added to the standards, is the intent to allow multiple certified capacity claims for a single product, a separate standard, and hotspot claims on support documentation?
Yeah, I would say it's possible, but highly unlikely. The historical conversation at the Joint Committee level has always been we want to avoid confusing consumers having one product with different capacity claims, and they've been pretty hard line on that.
All right, very good. Let's see. Zach, it was mentioned that WQA typically targets the 90th percentile when setting influent levels. Is this true for all influent target levels, or are some influent target levels purposely set more challenging?
Yeah, thank you. To clarify, that's not WQA, that's the Joint Committee, and it's a historical general practice. There are variants from that, and for a number of different reasons. Typical, higher spots somewhere where it's like it's either high or it's low. There's not like a general average, but typically from a historical look back perspective, 90% has been the target or 90th percentile, but it's not 100%.
Okay. And again, Zach and Abby, what happens to past products with a PFAS claim?
Yeah, so it really goes to evaluation of the past testing performance, and that's kind of the first step in determining if the product does already meet the new criteria. It'll also be interesting to look at data in terms of the reporting limits, because now that the effluent criteria for PFOA and PFOS is all the way down to 4 PPT, we'll need to make sure that reporting limits don't exceed that. And so in the past, there might be products that were tested where the reporting limit was higher because the PFOA, PFOS criteria was and currently is at 20 PPT. So first step is really just looking at the test data and working with your certification body to kind of understand what are the requirements for retesting. And then if retesting is required, really working with your certification body to understand, what does that time frame look like, because it's possible that there might need to be some kind of changes made to the product to be able to meet the new criteria. So it's really kind of a multi-step process, and working with your CV directly to make sure that you understand the full requirements for retesting.
Okay. Zach, is there a comparative capacity approach? Let me say that again. Comparative capacity approach being considered for PFBA as a surrogate, or is the industry leaning toward a fixed value?
Yeah, so the study is focused on comparative performance against the different compounds and how representative is PFBA and how conservative is it compared to the other compounds. So there's no response that's going on, I guess, at the Joint Committee level yet, but I would expect it to follow similarly to what happened with VOC and chloroform, which was comparative.
Okay. This gets back to timing and dates and everything like that. This question came in about that and said, Zach, is there a date when you expect the new testing regime to be in place? And this person is asking for testing of products being developed right now.
Yeah, I think, the ballot just passed. The Joint Committee meeting is in May. I would expect a publication of an update based on the effluents to happen soon in the next 6 months. If not, then for sure end of the year. And then after that, there's the implementation period at the certifying body level. So there's still a fair amount of runway before these are going to be hardline impacting products.
Okay. And also, Zac, is there any reason that indicates that PFAS can desorb off media just by backwashing or rinsing with potable water, with or without PFAS in it?
We haven't done a specific study on that, and the WQRF study was really on landfill leaching, which is a pretty specific protocol. But it is pretty stringent, so it would be similar. I would think that's a good indicator that there won't be an issue, but I don't have any like valid research data to say yes or no on that one. Sorry.
Okay. No, that's fair. Abby, this question comes in about a company wanting to know how they can get in touch with you for PFOS reduction testing for their equipment.
Sure. Yeah, so actually up on the slide right now is the gold seal at wqa.org email, or also our phone number. If you reach out to that email, you'll get in contact directly with our business development team here in product certification, and they can get you set up with whether it's testing or just R&D, like Zac was mentioning before, or full complete certification. We will address that there. And to go a little bit further, WQA specifically is currently able to test and evaluate to the new criteria. So we haven't implemented the standard yet. We are not certifying to the new version of this standard yet, but we can do the testing to support you if you are looking for it now.
Great. Zac, if a company states that they can treat influent to non-detect, generally, what is the detect level?
Yeah, so that actually gets a little messy. It depends on where you're going to get the testing done, and also exactly which compound you're talking about. But for the most part, people are pushing their detection limits down to 1 to 2 ppt, so less than half of the regulation level. But again, it's pretty messy to answer that question just because there's so many variables that can impact that.
Okay. And then here's a question that's a little more involved. So I'm just going to throw it out here and see who wants to answer it. There are currently PFAS testing kits readily available. EPA method 537.1, and they're like $350. Would this be a good way to get an early idea of the levels of these compounds? And this person says we're a community of 225 homes with our water supply from a spring or an adjacent park. 96% of our water comes from there. We would test a home water from the, I'm not exactly sure what that is, but from the water supply. So this is a small community treatment system.
It's hard to speak to the specific kit. Method 537.1 is the EPA method that's approved and very, very rigorous. So testing to that method would be a good way to start for sure. If it's a kit that's for sale from a local accredited laboratory, that's what we would recommend, is working with an accredited laboratory who has the EPA method that's relevant within their accredited scope. And most of that stuff is going to be public on their website. But that's kind of the best direction I can give you. And PFAS testing is expensive. $350 seems about right for what you're talking about.
And apologies if I did not get that question exactly right, but one other one popped in here. Can you provide a list of states with enforceable PFAS regulations? I don't know if Caroline, you want to take that one?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go digging on the internet and find those for you.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Very good. Let us know if that's something you can fit in here in the next couple of seconds. But if not, again, for the questions that you might have had today and you didn't get the satisfactory answer, we can definitely follow up with you as well. And I think that's a wrap, folks. Does anybody have any final comment or conclusion to add? Okay, very good. I want to thank our panelists, Abby and Caroline and Zac, for your presentation today. And if you enjoyed the webinar, by all means, consider joining us at the WQA Convention and Expo, April 28th through the 30th in Miami Beach. We're offering a full education schedule, thought-provoking daily general sessions, a lot of opportunities for collaboration and networking, of course, and the great expo with more than 200 exhibitors showcasing the latest in water treatment technologies. Registration and hotel reservations are open now, and you can consider applying for our hosted Water Pros program, which can help with costs of attending. All the details available at wqa.org/convention. And again, our thanks for joining us today on this special webinar. A recording is going to be made available to you as well, so look for that in your email. For all of us at the Water Quality Association, thanks for joining us and have a great day.